The Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, aka Swamp. If anybody finds this GoPro, apparently the alligator found us.
Oh, geez, love.
Yeah? Relax. We found our first alligator. So what do you think of walking around the Okefenokee swamp? This is the swamp's idea of a prairie. It looks kind of like a prairie, but if you look down, there's water. During the dry season, it does dry up. Taking a drive down one of the roads in the Wildlife Refuge.
Swamp Trail Drive. That's what we're on.
Who trail?
Swamp Trail.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose you could live in the swamp. I'm looking at it. It says Golden's New, and I can't get this word, M-O, new model, M-O-D-E-L. But it doesn't say what it is. Some parts of the swamp are higher and dry ground. This area through here looks to be pretty dry. There's another gator. It's even smaller than the other one. That's only, well, he might be 6 feet long. Have a nice day. Where the land is dry, there are a lot of trees.
That is an American alligator. And he looks to be about maybe 6 years old. You can gauge about how old they are from the number of inches between the eye and the nose. The number of inches from eye to nose roughly correlates to the number of overall feet and body length. And they grow at about 1 foot per year for the first 7 years of life. So 6 inches from eye to nose, that means he's about 6 feet long. That accounts for 6 years of growth. He's 6 years old. But these creatures can live for up to 75 years in the wild. Very long. Source. So to recap, between the acidity level here, the fact that we have no rivers flowing in, and the fact there's a mild current out here means that unlike water from any of the swamp, anywhere else in the world, the water here in the Okefenokee is actually safe enough for me to do this. Tastes like green tea. It's actually better than what I get at home.
Really?
Yep.
You don't get sick?
Nope. I drink this stuff every day. It has yet to kill me. Oh, and up ahead on the left, we have a red-shouldered hawk perched looking for his dinner. Oh, and this...
That looks like a snake.
That is an American bittern that almost flew directly into us. Wow, that's a rare sight this time of year. You don't see them very often. All right, so these guys are amazing. They are in the heron family, which is why they look kind of familiar. Contrary to popular belief, we are not safe in these boats because they cannot reach us. They can leap 5 feet or more out of the water. Easily enough to get into one of these boats.
Okay.
what actually keeps us safe more than anything is their lack of interest in us. We're too big for them to really consider food, and any other confrontation with us is really just a waste of energy on their part, so they'd rather just leave us alone. While most crocodiles have a rather mean disposition and temperament, the American alligator has an almost docile, sweet temperament about it. They really don't mean us any harm. So while a lot of the animals around here really do steal the show, this is where I like to point out what is arguably the most iconic species found in the refuge. But it's not an animal, it's a plant. The cypress tree. Now the cypress tree is easily identified by its wide base down around the water line, then it gets very skinny very quickly and shoots straight up. But more so, it's easily identified by a very distinguishing feature. It's these woody, stubby looking things that you see jutting up out of the water on the base of the tree. They look a lot like stalagmites sticking up in a cave. We're about to pass a whole bunch on the right. So those funny looking things are called cypress knees, and they're actually part of the tree's root system. But we're not entirely certain what purpose they serve. There have been a lot of theories over the years though. Originally, people thought they were young cypress trees growing up and that's how they reproduce. That's not the case. The cypress tree is a deciduous conifer. It reproduces the same way anything with a pine cone reproduces, not by budding. So it's out of the question. Now the next big theory was that they're there to aerate the root system of the tree. They provide oxygen to the roots underwater like a snorkel. But recently some scientists got together, got smart, and conducted an experiment, so true that was, by applying wax to the surface of knees on some trees. And to date, no discernible difference has been noted in the growth rates between trees that have wax on their knees versus trees that don't. So it doesn't sound like they aerate the roots either. Now there's two theories that I love. And the first one I just tell everyone because it makes my inner child really happy. And that's the cypress knee was developed evolutionarily as a form of mastodon deterrence. You see, back during the Pleistocene era, mastodons, you know, those big woolly elephants, they'd go stomping around wet forests and wooded swamps like this, and they'd uproot and overturn trees and make game trails. Well, that would kill the trees. So the theory goes that these knees were developed by the trees to hurt the feet of the mastodon if they came stomping too close, and that would protect them. Now, I like that theory, it sounds cool, and it makes my inner 5-year-old smile, but there's no way to prove it. We can't even test it because we don't have mastodons anymore. They're extinct. So there's another theory that I tend to lean toward. It's got to do with how the roots of these trees grow. You see, the roots of the cypress tree don't grow down as much as they grow out in a radius around the tree to give it a wider base to help keep it upright in this wet, swampy environment. And when these trees grow in close proximity to one another, like they do around here, the roots of one tree will interweave and interlock with the roots of another. When they do that, they're holding onto each other and they're helping keep each other upright. So what looks like it's happening here is these knees are providing points of anchorage for other trees to wrap roots around, get a better grip on, and it makes it easier for them to hold on to each other and to keep each other upright. Now the beauty of that theory is that it essentially states that these trees evolved to live communally, that they're designed by nature to support one another, which is a somewhat unique scenario in nature. Typically, individuals of any species will compete for life and resources. They don't usually cooperate like that. So if that theory stands true, it makes the cypress tree a relatively unique organism in that regard. He's still snack size. Oh yeah, and as far as the large hard-shelled turtles go, the alligators do not have a hard time eating them. The alligators eat the turtles the way you and I eat M&Ms. Found across the region, Spanish moss. You can probably guess why I bring it up here.
Yeah.
Now, contrary to its name, it's neither Spanish nor is it moss. Most people think that it's a parasite, that it feeds on and kills the trees that it grows on over time, but that's not the case. This is actually a type of rootless air plant. It's an epiphyte, physically incapable of harming anything. It just needs somewhere high up to hang from so it can filter out nutrients and moisture through the air. It's a filter feeder. Other than that, all it does is hang there and look mysterious. It doesn't hurt anything. Now, the reason it's called Spanish moss goes back to the olden days, when this region was still under Spanish control. Back then, the conquistadors used to grow out their beards long and scraggly, while the French, that had colonies further north, would keep their faces cleanly shaved. So over time, the French began to associate the Spaniards and their beards with this plant, and they started to call it Spanish beard. Well, sometime later, a botanist who was well-educated and well-respected, he came along and looked at this plant and said it looked like moss, therefore it must be moss, and did no further investigation into it beyond that. So what he missed is the fact that this is a flowering plant, and no moss on the planet produces a flower. Now, they are little and easy to overlook. I grew up around Spanish moss, and I had no idea it flowered until I was an adult. But it is there, and you'd think that a well-respected botanist would have caught that. Well, he didn't. Because he missed it, he misidentified this as a species of moss, and he called it Spanish beard moss. And over time, that was simply shortened to Spanish moss. But it's not Spanish, not moss, not invasive, and not a parasite. I've heard all these claims and they're all untrue. This is just a native rootless air plant. Funny enough, it's actually in the bromeliad family, so its closest living relative is the pineapple plant. Welcome to Chester Prairie. Now, believe it or not, prairies like this one are what between a quarter to a third of the swamp truly looks like. The canal, because it's man-made, it's highly unnatural. When they dug it out, they piled all of the peat and soil and everything from the center up onto the outer edges, which gave unnaturally shallow and firm footing for trees and other plants to grow out of. So that's why you have those strong straight lines of plants either side of it. But that's not natural. That's not what the swamp is supposed to look like. An area like this, a prairie, this is a much more natural environment within this swamp. Vast open spaces sparsely dotted by clusters of trees. This is the Okefenokee. Guys, we're also lucky to be here during a season when we have so many flowering plants blooming. Not only do we have the golden club popping up all over the place, but we also have the white water lily right now, which is that white flower that you see floating all around us. And they don't bloom 24 hours a day. They respond to fluctuations in barometric pressure. So usually later in the afternoon or right before a big rainstorm, they will actually pull their petals in, close themselves off, and seal up to the outside world. And then, the dawn of the following day, when the sun rises, they will gradually spread their petals back out and bloom once again. And each individual flower only blooms for 3 days before it dies.
Oh, wow.
And you'll also notice a number of tall purple flowers, very sparsely dotted around us. Those are swamp iris, and they only bloom for a couple of weeks out of the year. That is a great egret, third largest wading bird you can find in the swamp, and an avid hunter. Rather intelligent too, although to be fair, basically everything in the heron family is pretty intelligent. But these guys have been shown many times to, if they're having a hard time finding food in water, they will catch bugs, keep them alive, and dangle them over water where they know fish to live. And when the fish come up to take the bait, they spear them and eat them. We also got another coastal plain cooter up on the right. Actually, this one might be a Florida redbelly. I could be wrong, but I believe that one is a Florida redbelly cooter. You see those feet. And that's a female. Yeah, that's huge, massive female.
My neck.
All right, our trip is over. Everybody out.
Yep.
This is a New Jersey boat ride.
Yes.
Now, this is just where I like to park it for a minute, and I bring together everything that we've talked about up to this point, and I'll tell you guys why this swamp is called Okefenokee. So it is admittedly a funny sounding word, but it's actually related to that peat that I told you about earlier. The way it works is, as all that dead plant matter is decaying underwater over time, it's producing methane as a natural byproduct. And usually methane is released up to the water harmlessly without notice. You never even know it was there. But sometimes it gets trapped inside pockets of the peat. Sometimes these pockets can be huge. Now, when that happens, it can build up to the point where the pressure becomes so great that it forces the peat on top to break away from the bottom, drift it through the water, and float on the surface, at which point it doesn't look like dead plant matter, it looks like mud, convincingly like solid ground. And it doesn't come up alone either. It comes up filled with seeds from grasses, bushes, shrubs, whatever you find growing out here, because that's where it all came from, it was all plant matter. While it's floating on top of the water like that, all those seeds and that nutrient-rich peat now exposed to sunlight, they start to germinate and plants start to grow out of it. In quick order, they will take over the whole thing and it will look like a little island. Even though it's not, it'll look exactly like one. A good example is what we're parked on right now. This is not an island. This isn't solid ground. It's not ground at all. This is just a floating mass of peat that happens to be growing plants. Now, it may look solid enough, like get out and take a walk on it, but if you try that, you learn very quickly that this is not solid.
Wow.
Just a floating mass of peat.
So that's not mud.
Nope, that's all peat. And that is where the name Okefenokee comes from. You see, the word Okefenokee is a corruption of a bunch of different native words that, to the best of our understanding, roughly translate to the land of trembling earth. This is what it's referencing, how it looks like the earth is trembling underfoot when you try walking out on top of that peat. But more importantly than the name of the swamp, that is where the life cycle comes from. You see, the Okefenokee has a life cycle all of its own. You can kind of think of the whole swamp as one big organism. And its life begins with a prairie, big treeless space like this one. So at some point, somewhere out in that prairie, some peat is going to blow up from the bottom and float on the surface, at which point it's called a blow up, for obvious reasons. And it'll look something like that over there. That's a good example of a blow up. But pretty soon, plants will take it over, and it will look like this we're parked in right now. This is called a battery. It's in reference to old army artillery batteries back in the olden days when they had cannons that they camouflaged with grass, leaves, twigs, things like that. So that's where they get the nickname from. But batteries like this one will drift around aimlessly for an indefinite amount of time. But eventually a tree, almost always a cypress tree, it'll find its way into that peat, take root, and start to grow out of it. In fact, we've got one doing that already over here. Doesn't look like much right now, but this is a young cypress sapling growing right out of the peat. So that part of the process has already begun. Now what's going to happen is, as that tree grows, its roots will reach down to the peat, then down through the water underneath. And eventually they will find the floor of the swamp down below. And when they do, they will root this battery in place. It will become stationary. That tree then continues to grow, and other trees will join in with it, growing alongside it, radiating out until the entire thing is completely overtaken, at which point we call it a house. Now give it a little while, and all those trees will grow off beyond the confines of the peat into the water in all directions, and this will end up lost entirely. And it'll look something like that back there behind us. That's a big house, but it probably started off as a floating mass of peat like this one over here. Now this part of the process takes a long time to occur, but if given ample time, houses like that one, they keep growing and span out, and then they meet up with other houses. And they grow and span out some more and meet up with others, so on and so forth, growing larger and larger. All the root systems of all those trees will enter big, a little out of control, they become a prairie-making fire. And this is why they're called that. If it comes across this area, it will eat up all that vegetation, burn it down, and open the prairie back up. And the whole cycle starts all over again from the beginning. And that is a life cycle of the Okefenokee. That's how the swamp works. It's a self-sustaining cycle that's been going on thousands of years, long before the first humans ever set foot out here. The amazing thing is, every organism you find living here has a part to play in that life cycle. Nothing is exempt. The example that I like to give the most are the snapping turtles. We have a lot of them out here. And what they do is they hunt for food. And one of the ways they hunt is by digging around with their sharp claws through the peat at the bottom of the swamp, looking for things like crawfish. But as they're doing that, they're loosening the peat up. And sometimes they loosen it up enough to where when they hit a pocket of methane or they dig around one, it will actually help the peat on top break away from the bottom, drift up to the top, and start this process. So a lot of what you see in this environment, from the blow-ups to the forest, is the end result of something as simple as a turtle hunting for food. Like I said, every organism found out here has a part to play in that life cycle. And believe it or not, that's actually what makes this place so unique. Because with the exception of a handful of species, we don't really have a lot of endemics out here. And in case anyone isn't sure, a species that is endemic to a location means you can only find it in that location. You can't find it anywhere else. Now we do have a few endemics out here, but for the most part, almost everything that you find in the Okefenokee, you can find somewhere else outside of it. What you won't find anywhere else are all these species coexisting in the same ecosystem and interacting the way they do here. That's what makes this place such a gem of ecology. It's one of the reasons being nominated as a World Heritage Site, and one of the reasons why in 1937 it was established as a refuge, which is what granted it protection and everything in it protection. And that was immeasurably important back at the time, because in those days, a lot of the species that you find out here now were on the way out the door, nearing extinction. Surprising but sad example is the American alligator. We almost lost it entirely as a species. They were hunted to the brink of extinction for their skin, because back in those days, everybody wanted alligator skin handbags and boots. But thanks to conservation efforts and refuges like this one, their populations have recovered. Like I said, you've got between 10 and 15 in this swamp alone. So they've recovered just fine all across the region. And there are some species that have recovered alongside them, like the great egrets. Hard to imagine today, but 100 years ago, you didn't see them in the wild. They're hunted to the edge of annihilation because of their breeding plumes. Everybody wanted to wear those as hat feathers. We keep making the same mistakes. Eventually we'll learn. But the problem is there are a lot of species that are still recovering, like the red-cockaded woodpecker, the gopher tortoise, the eastern indigo snake, just to name a small handful of endangered species and species of concern that rely on this environment and habitats like it to survive and to continue to recover. And that's why we work so hard to protect this swamp. We fight to keep it safe and preserve it, and honestly, why we bring everyone out here. So you guys can see for yourselves exactly how unique and special this environment is. So you can lend it support and help us keep it protected, because it absolutely deserves that kind of respect, and unfortunately, the creatures out here absolutely need that kind of protection. But unfortunately, say hello.
Yeah, I know it.
Hey, fellow.
Making their homes here in the swamp. Swampers, as they're sometimes called, settled on the pine-covered islands and upland edge of the swamp throughout the last 2 centuries. Now, just like the Native Americans before them, these homesteaders found that the swamp provided just about everything they needed to survive. They built sturdy cabins of pine poles and cypress and raised their cattle and hogs in the piney woods. They hunted bear, deer, squirrel, rabbit, turkey, ducks, and other game. And in the sandy soil, they grew corn, sweet potatoes, sugar cane, peanuts, peaches, pecans and tomatoes and other garden crops. And they kept bees for honey. Now, you may find diagonal cuts on some trees in and around the Okefenokee where folks harvested the sap of pine trees for naval stores or turpentine. It was used for everything from a medicinal salve to ink. Swampers were self-reliant, hardy folk with a strong sense of independence. Living so far from the nearest town, they had to work hard to survive. They also had to entertain themselves. They told stories, sang, played music, and invented games. Folks lived out here long before telephones were common in every home, so they had to find a way to communicate across long distances. Swamp hollering became a way of driving the cows home, announcing your arrival for supper, or just letting folks know where you were. The flat terrain and openness of the Okefenokee carried sound for quite a ways, sometimes 1 or 2 miles. Because of the size of the Okefenokee and the lack of phone and radio towers in the swamp, hollering is still probably one of the most reliable ways to communicate.